Let's continue with our discussion of The Corporation in the 21st Century by Sir John Kay. Today is the third part of our interpretation. When people picture a large company, many might imagine a giant factory. Endless workshops, roaring machines, countless workers producing tangible goods. That's a manufacturing company. But this image is rapidly becoming outdated, as manufacturing is in decline. Manufacturing has long declined in the United States, and the same is bound to happen in China. This shift shocks many people's worldviews, especially those who believe that only manufacturing jobs are real jobs. What Sir Kay calls manufacturing fetishism or obsession with manufacturing. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many people were asked to work from home. The Economist interviewed a British woman who dismissed those working remotely in their pajamas, saying, "If you can do your job in pajamas, then it's not a real job." So, what do such people consider a real job? It's putting on a uniform and working in a factory, or doing traditionally male jobs like mining or metalworking. Tasks typically done by women, such as cooking or childcare, are often dismissed as non-work, no matter how skilled or demanding. In traditional thinking, agriculture is the most important industry because it provides food. Next comes manufacturing because it produces tangible, weighty things. Services, by contrast, are viewed as insignificant. If your job is to cut hair or do beauty treatments, it's not seen as serious work. Yet the number of manufacturing jobs is declining year by year. Take a look at this chart. In the early 19th century, 80% of Americans worked in agriculture. Today, that number is just 1%. The peak of U.S. manufacturing employment was in the 1920s, at about 30%. It's been in decline ever since, with a brief rebound in the 60s and 70s to just above 20%. By 2019, manufacturing accounted for only 8.5% of all U.S. jobs. Not only does manufacturing employ fewer people, it also generates less wealth. By the late 1980s, manufacturing had already stopped contributing significantly to U.S. economic growth. People have shifted to the service sector. This is a universal historical trend every country has experienced or will experience. But some people are unhappy about it. Trump's election and Brexit were both closely tied to the decline of manufacturing jobs. Many believe only manufacturing can provide quality employment and lift people into the middle class. Trump blamed China for stealing U.S. manufacturing jobs. A fundamental misunderstanding. In reality, manufacturing jobs in China are also declining. A research report by 21st Century Business Herald shows that the proportion and number of manufacturing workers in China's urban employment have both been falling since 2012, despite staying above 20% overall. By 2018, education jobs had overtaken manufacturing in total numbers. Moreover, since 2013, manufacturing's share of China's GDP has been falling year after year, faster than in any other industrial country during the same historical stage. In short, manufacturing's importance to the Chinese economy is decreasing, just like in the U.S. The report calls this a warning sign, noting that in the U.S. the decline of manufacturing coincided with a rising Gini coefficient and widening wealth gap. Therefore, the report concludes that, to achieve common prosperity, China must preserve the share of manufacturing. In my view, this is the wrong conclusion drawn from the right data. Sure, if everyone works in factories, wages may become more equal. But we can't say everyone should stay in factories just to keep incomes the same. That's like saying since messaging apps made it easier to talk with distant friends, people now visit neighbors less. And deciding that to preserve neighborhood bonds, we should force people to visit their neighbors more often. If wealth inequality is a new problem, we need new solutions. U.S. manufacturing didn't decline, because China stole its jobs, and China's manufacturing didn't shrink, because factories moved to Southeast Asia. The truth is, manufacturing naturally declines. Let's first clarify what manufacturing really is. As early as 1894, economist Philip Wicksteed proposed a theory called the production function model, which best captures the essence of manufacturing. Capital plus labor. Capitalists supply the machines, workers supply the labor. The two are additive and somewhat interchangeable. Add more capital or more labor, and output increases. There are diminishing returns, of course, but basically, your production depends on how much capital and labor you have. And in the late 19th century, that function was the same for every company. No one had a technical advantage. You could buy the same machines I could, and hire the same workers for similar pay. The more capital and labor you had, the more profit you made. It was just simple math. At first, everything that was produced could be sold. But when competition increased and overcapacity appeared, companies had to race to the bottom. Cut profits, lower wages, lay off workers if necessary. In this capital plus labor model, the ideal worker is like a machine. Or even a machine part. Factories need highly replaceable workers with no special skills or creativity. We've discussed in our channel how Frederick Taylor developed scientific management in the early 20th century US, breaking down tasks into standard steps so any person could do the job with minimal training. If you didn't want to do the work, someone else could replace you. In fact, Taylor disliked exceptional workers. If you worked faster than others, you disrupted factory order. And that wasn't wanted. Put simply, factories didn't need people, they needed workhorses. Who would want to be that kind of tool? Most were just trying to earn a living. This led thinkers to assume that economic activity was inherently selfish. Marx said piecework wages were the most compatible with capitalism. Adam Smith said, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Self-interest may drive things, but the system was harsh on workers. Manufacturing favors capital, not labor. Machines are expensive and owned by capitalists. Labor is replaceable, so workers had little bargaining power and could be easily exploited. But that didn't last forever. Since the 19th century, the capital plus labor model has undergone fundamental improvements. On the labor side, there were two paths. The Soviet path eliminated capitalists and left only machines and workers. In theory, workers took over the factories. In practice, workers couldn't provide the machines. Only the state could. Bureaucrats replaced capitalists, and workers still had no say in their wages or working conditions. The US and UK allowed workers to unionize and collectively bargain with capitalists. One worker might be replaceable. A group of them, not so much. As a result, workers improved their conditions and gained political rights. In the UK, Labour Party governments pushed forward strong welfare programs. History shows the Anglo-American approach succeeded, while the Soviet one failed. Because the former preserved market mechanisms, while the latter was dominated by bureaucracy. On the capital side, there was an even more fundamental shift. Enter the public company. Once shares could be freely traded, you didn't need to own a whole factory to own part of a company. Rich people could buy shares, institutions could invest, ordinary people could buy in, and even workers could own shares. So who was the capitalist now? Another funding source was banks, pooling deposits to lend to businesses. If the company failed, shareholders had limited liability and didn't have to repay the bank out of pocket. So again, who exactly is the capitalist? Modern corporations separated ownership and management. Many people can own a company, but they don't interfere in operations. Managers run the business. And they're not capitalists. Through the 1960s and 70s, U.S. manufacturing was in its golden age. Workers earned well, capitalists profited, and factory products were strong. It was the ideal state of manufacturing. But after that, U.S. manufacturing began to decline. Look at the Fortune 500 companies of the 1950s. Many top firms were manufacturers. A few decades later, they were replaced by service and tech companies. The old empires collapsed. Why? Manufacturing faces two fundamental problems. First, the conflict between scale and management. Manufacturing requires scale. The bigger your output, the lower your per-unit cost. But a large company becomes harder to manage. Departments form vested interests and resist innovation. It's almost inevitable in large corporations. That's why IBM didn't invent the PC, AT&T didn't invent the smartphone, and GM didn't invent the electric car. K writes, "The advantages of scale are technological and appear visible. The disadvantages are mostly human and less immediately apparent. Second, the better you are at manufacturing something, the cheaper it becomes. And the less profit you make. Manufacturing offers no inherent uniqueness. As long as someone has the right machines, raw materials, and willing workers, they can replicate your product. What you make is standardized, and as you do it better, it becomes less scarce. You end up in overcapacity or price wars. Take suits. They were expensive when materials were scarce. Now, you can buy a decent-looking, durable, wrinkle-free suit online for a few hundred yuan. Is there a future in making suits? The future lies in the non-manufacturing parts. Like branding. An Italian-branded suit might cost 10 times more. Or design. A custom-tailored, uniquely styled suit could cost 10 times that. The point is, a product's value isn't in its weight, size, or number of atoms, but in the information embedded in it. What really makes money is branding and design. The virtual elements. Once a country satisfies its basic industrial needs, it must shift to more profitable production, i.e. more virtual value. You become wealthy not by making more or bigger things, but by making better and more complex things. Now you may ask, are you denying the importance of industrial production? Do you want China to become hollowed out like the US? Of course not. Agriculture doesn't make much money, but no modern country says, let's stick to agriculture. Still, no great power can abandon farming. Similarly, K isn't saying any country should give up on manufacturing. I believe he's saying we shouldn't cling to it, and definitely shouldn't rely on it for economic growth. History shows manufacturing won't create more jobs. With automation, fewer workers are needed. You can build smart factories full of robots. But it's still capital-heavy and labor-light. And you can't escape the fate that manufactured goods get cheaper and cheaper. Manufacturing is no longer the engine of economic growth. Efforts like Trump's to bring manufacturing back to America, or to force TSMC to produce top chips in the US go against the tide of history. Sometimes politics trumps economics, but things that violate economic logic never last. People often say, we need to raise the added value of Chinese manufacturing. After this discussion, you'll see why that's wrong. High value is invented and designed, not manufactured. It's not added to manufacturing. Maybe it shouldn't even be called added value. Look at Apple. It can outsource manufacturing to China and keep only the invention and design. The high value. Of course, a great power must have manufacturing. But what you really want is value, not just manufacturing. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.